Welcome to today's webinar, Detection of Dementia, Clues in the Electronic Medical Record and Strategies to Minimize Quality of Life. This series is coordinated by the Aging Initiative, which is an R24-funded initiative that bridges the expertise and leadership of the Healthcare Systems Research Network, formerly called the HMO Research Network, and the NIH-funded Claude D. Older Americans Independent Centers, or PEPPER Centers. The initiative is led by Dr. Jerry Gerwitz at University of Massachusetts and Primary Care Institute, along with co-PIs Elizabeth Bayless and Jay Magaziner. My name is Leah Hanson. I'm a senior research investigator at HealthPartners and will lead the Aging Initiative's Dissemination Workgroup along with Heather Whitson at the Duke University PEPPER Center. Before we get started, I just want to cover a few technical details. Due to the large number of registrants for today's webinar, we have placed your phone lines on mute in order to reduce the audio feedback. So once you're logged in as a host or panelist, line is muted. How we definitely welcome and encourage audience participation using the Q&A and chat features of webinar software. If Cisco Webinar portal under the tab that says Presentation, and you look in the upper right, you should see the icon for chat and an icon for Q&A. If you have a question for our speakers, please use the Q&A icon. We will count for the questions, and if time permits, read them after the presentations. If you have a technical or logistical question, we ask that you submit those using the chat function so that our webinar host can help you troubleshoot any problems you're having with audio or other issues. Chat function, you can choose whether you'd like your comments to be available to all participants, or you can choose to send your comment only to the host. And a huge thank you to Catherine and Zoni and her team who do amazing work behind the scenes to make these webinars possible. They'll be monitoring this chat function today to help you with any technical troubleshooting issues. I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Dr. Sascha Dublin is an epidemiologist and general internal medicine physician. She works at Kaiser Permanente, Washington, where she spends 80% of time doing research and 20% of time providing primary care in a Kaiser clinic near Seattle, Washington. In clinical role, she cares for many older adults and provides consultations to her clinical colleagues on geriatric issues. Her recent interests include innovative uses of EMR data and all medication safety in older adults and other vulnerable populations. Our second speaker is Dr. Deborah Barnes. She's an associate professor of psychiatry and epidemiology and biostatistics at the University of California, San Francisco, a health science specialist with the San Francisco VA healthcare system, senior investigator with Tideswell at UCSF. Her research focuses on identification of modifiable risk factors for Alzheimer's disease and dementia, development of dementia risk prediction models, and interventions to delay the onset and slow progression of dementia. We'll be talking about recent work on strategies to maximize quality of life in those who are living with dementia. I'll pass now to Dr. Dublin.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes.
Great. I'm very happy to be here with you today to share our work on early detection of dementia. Are there clues in the electronic medical record? To thank and appreciate the team that's been part of this work, including my co-presenter, Deb Barnes, as well as other scientists and staff members at the San Francisco VA, UC San Francisco, and Kaiser Permanente, Washington. Here's an outline of what I'll be covering in my talk. I'll start by talking to you briefly about the background of the research question and why we think it's so important. I'll cover our study objectives and then briefly go into our study methods. I'll present some of our results and we'll conclude with a discussion and next steps. I'll start with a couple of patient stories from my own practice because these are the kinds of cases I see that really inspire me to pursue this line of work. May was an older woman who I met when she was brought in by her daughter who was very worried about her memory. And during our visit, the mother rarely spoke. The daughter did almost all of the talking, and the mother really couldn't give me any history. And when I looked in her chart, I saw she hadn't been for several years. And it turned out the mother had forgotten to pay her health insurance premiums and, in fact, had lost her Kaiser insurance, and that's why we hadn't seen her. When the daughter discovered what was going on, she paid the premiums, got her mother's insurance back, and had brought her in. And at this point, when I did cognitive testing, I found, not really to our surprise, she had very advanced dementia. One patient I saw in clinic who made a very big impression on me was Mr. J, who was brought in by family members. He had a large and very concerned family who felt he was not doing well at home, and they didn't understand what was going on. They had found him with home in great disarray and looking like something bad had happened. They thought maybe he'd fallen or been attacked. There was blood in the house, and he couldn't explain what had happened or if he'd been injured. He was a highly educated man who had been a Boeing engineer, and he was very polite and very appropriate in his interactions with me, and really hid very well the fact that he was having cognitive difficulties. And in our initial visit, we made a very long list of the problems and the concerns and the things to investigate, including memory. And then he didn't come back for follow-up, and he, in fact, had several scheduled appointments with me that he no-showed. And then finally, when I saw him again, he came in with urgent symptoms, was almost unable to walk, and evaluation was done urgently and found he had metastatic cancer with mets to spinal cord and went on hospice and died very shortly after that. And as I reviewed his chart in more detail, it actually looked like he had been found to have possible prostate cancer many years earlier with a very high PSA and had failed to follow up with urology or get follow-up testing done. And it seemed quite possible that early cognitive changes had led to him not being able to follow through and manage this aspect of his care. And it was very puzzling to think about how a highly educated man who's eager to follow medical advice and had a supportive family had really slipped through the cracks and been unable to get the care he needed. Cases, and I have seen others like them, have led me and my partners in this work to ask, were there any clues in these patients' interactions with the healthcare system that could us realize sooner that they had dementia or early cognitive impairment and needed much more help than families were giving them? Back and looking more broadly at the societal impact, currently it's estimated there are 5 million people in the U.S. living with Alzheimer's disease, a number that's expected to grow dramatically in years to come. And it's believed that about half of these people currently living with Alzheimer's disease haven't been formally diagnosed and don't have a name for what's going on for them. So that many of these people have comorbid conditions that really need their engagement and their self-management. For instance, diabetes. They need to monitor diets, check their sugars, take their medicines, and these are all things that become increasingly difficult when people have impairment. The things that can happen to our patients if they have undiagnosed dementia, there are many adverse consequences. So first of all, they may have great difficulty with self-management of chronic conditions, such as just remembering to take their medications. If their conditions get out of control, they may have preventable emergency department visits and patient hospitalizations. Even if they remain physically well, they may have behaviors that are risky. People may they continue driving long after we may they should have stopped. They may be managing their finances and having difficulty paying their bills, or they may be taken advantage of by other people. They all miss out on opportunities they could have had to plan for their future and to express their wishes and preferences about their care. And we know that these patients and their families can experience a lot of stress when they understand what's going on. Our work in developing this kind of research, we've done surveys and focus groups, and we've met with family members. And this is a representative quote from a family member of a Kaiser Permanente Washington patient who expressed this in response to a survey. The daughter wrote, "We think our mom had dementia for 4 or 5 years before she was finally diagnosed. She spent those years living in a confused and scary world that she handled with anger and sometimes rage. It would have been very helpful for us to know what was wrong from the beginning." So these kinds of forces motivating us, here are our goals and objectives. Our long-term goal is to test an automated tool that would use EMR data, routinely available data, to identify patients who are likely to have undiagnosed dementia, so that we reach out to them, potentially bring them in for testing, and help them get better support. So to move towards that long-term goal, we had a goal in the current project, which was to develop preliminary data that would support this work, things that would let us write future larger grants. So some of the steps we wanted to take now were to identify a cohort of patients who we thought had undiagnosed dementia and to then validate this concept to find out, like, are these really people with undiagnosed dementia? Then we wanted to extract EMR variables that could be predictors of dementia, include create some novel variables that we didn't have easy access to, things like identifying people who know for clinic visits. We have sources of funding for this work. We are very grateful to our funders. One was the HCSRN-OAICs AGING Programs Pilot Grant Program. We also had funding from Tideswell at UCSF. Particular pilot project, the specific aims were to determine the feasibility of obtaining this kinds of novel EMR data that would reveal chaotic patterns of care, such as clinic visits, describe patterns of healthcare utilization in patients with undiagnosed dementia, and to describe adherence to chronic cardiovascular medications in patients with undiagnosed dementia. And I'll be showing you results for the first two aims today. Conceptual model. We believe that there might be an EMR fingerprint of undiagnosed dementia. So we believe that there are a group of patients who have both undiagnosed dementia and comorbid illnesses, and that when you put those things together, you see signs, and the signs are in the boxes to the right. So difficulty managing comorbid conditions could show up as extreme or outlier values for things we monitor in chronic conditions, such as their blood pressure or their hemoglobin A1C, which is a measure of how well blood sugar is controlled in patients with diabetes. They also may not fill their medications. They may have poor adherence. We believe and hypothesize that these patients might have chaotic healthcare utilization. They might have very many preventive or primary care visits. Instead, they may have ER visits or hospitalizations or shows for visits. And we hypothesize that they might present with other symptoms we know are related to dementia, such as depression, weight change, particularly weight loss, or problems with sleep. And the model guided how we thought about our potential predictor variables. So I'll step back and give you an overview of the study. We had access to unique resources that really are the only way a study like this would have been possible. We were able to access data from a prospective cohort study that looks for dementia in patients. At the same time, those data linked with electronic medical records data from Kaiser. And so the patients in our study have gold standard data about whether they have dementia or not, and this data comes from the research studies work. We also have their EMR data, which show how they've interacted with the healthcare system. And in EMR data, we can try to figure out, when did their healthcare team recognize that the patient was demented? Was it before or after the research study thought that the patient was demented? I'll give you some background on the cohort study that made this work possible. This is the Adult Changes in Thought Study, or ACT study. It's conducted at Kaiser Permanente, Washington, and the principal investigators are Dr. Eric Larson and Dr. Paul Crane. And the prospective cohort study that started in 1994, it's set within Kaiser Permanente, Washington, which many of you may know of as Group Health. We were acquired in March and are going through the transition of becoming a Kaiser Permanente healthcare system. But an integrated system, which means we're both an insurance company and the clinics where we actually provide our members care. ACT people enrolled in our health plan who are 65 and older, live in the community, and don't have dementia when they join the study. The parents come in for visits every 2 years, and the goal in those visits is to detect any new dementia that has developed and to collect data about dementia risk factors and other kinds of exposures. The study is ongoing. So far, we've enrolled more than 5,000 people. We've diagnosed dementia more than 1,000 people, and we continue to enroll new people and to maintain a cohort of 2,000 people and follow them over time. We're grateful to the National Institute on Aging for their support of this study. I'd like to tell you about how ACT identifies dementia cases. The participants are screened every 2 years with a screening instrument, the CASI, the Cognitive Ability Screening Instrument, and if they have a low score, they'll get a detailed evaluation, which includes things like detailed neuropsychological testing, a physician exam, and a review of existing records and existing imaging, and new imaging can be ordered if it's felt needed. And and the Multidisciplinary Consensus Committee that meets regularly and reviews all of the data, and they find the dementia diagnoses using the DSM-4 criteria for dementia. So it's really research quality, active screening, active follow-up, and research quality diagnoses. And are able to access all of the EMR data for our participants, and these are the Kaiser EMR data, so they include things like diagnoses, all their pharmacy data on medication fills, and signs such as their weight, their pressure, and all kinds of other things like laboratory results. And from these EMR data, we can tell if a person received, there was any evidence, such as dementia-related diagnosis codes or medications before their ACT dementia diagnosis or after their dementia diagnosis. So how do we define this concept of undiagnosed dementia? Participants who were found to have dementia in ACT, we find the ACT study visit, which led to them where they had an abnormal cognitive test. This is the visit that prompted them getting diagnosed. And we know that they had dementia at that time, and we call this the index visit. And we're only studying people who have at least 2 years of prior Kaiser enrollment because we want to make sure that they had an adequate amount of EMR data to be sure that we're really seeing what their team knew. And consider these people to have undiagnosed dementia if we look in their EMR data and for the past 2 years we don't see any diagnosis codes for dementia or any prescription fills for dementia medication. Actually back unlimited time, not just 2 years for this. And then we look for subjective memory complaints in the past 2 years with the feeling that if they're coming into their doctor complaining about memory, that would be enough of a prompt that their doctor knows they might need a workup, and we probably wouldn't be adding much by kind of bugging their doctor with automated reminders. We found that in the ACT study, 44% of those people who developed dementia and where ACT said they had dementia appeared to be undiagnosed by their healthcare team at that time, and that was using their EMR data. We then went in and read through their medical records for a small sample to see if we were right, and we were able to confirm that in 90% of that sample, they really hadn't been recognized by their healthcare team before ACT made the diagnosis. So we'd established the right cohort to see what do people with undiagnosed dementia look like. We did a comparison group. So we focused on ACT participants without dementia. We selected 3 controls for each case. We required that they ACT visit around the same time the case had their index visit, and this becomes the index date of the control. And then they had to have 2 years of prior Kaiser enrollment to make sure there were good EMR data available. Now, what variables should we look at as covariates that would be potential predictors of undiagnosed dementia? One of our guiding principles was these have to be characteristics that are well captured in an EMR because we wanted to develop this automated score. And if something such as, toxin exposure or education is not going to be available from your EMR, there's no point putting it in your predictive model. We then developed this list of covariates a priori based on things like clinical plausibility, a review of the literature, and what's been in existing prediction scores. We focused on things or known dementia risk factors, and then we used our conceptual model. For instance, I meant that we were interested in evidence of difficulty managing comorbid conditions, healthcare utilization, and dementia-related symptoms that are often, presenting symptoms of people with dementia. So to measure whether someone's having difficulty managing a chronic condition. Our idea was that these may be people who have inadequate control of something, like poor blood pressure control or poor control of diabetes, or they might have labile control. They might have great control some days and terrible control others, because maybe sometimes they take their medicines and sometimes they forget. Hypertension, we decided to focus on what was their lowest blood pressure and their highest blood pressure in the past 2 years, and we actually just calculated the difference between them and the minimum and called that sort of measure of stability of blood pressure. And we took a similar approach for hemoglobin A1C for patients with diabetes. We're also interested in missingness. How often were patients missing a measure of hemoglobin A1C? Because forgetting to come in labs could be a marker for early disease associated with dementia. We're interested in this idea of how could we find no-shows for clinic visits, and it was pretty easy to find this in EPIC, which is our EMR. The data from EPIC go into the back-end databases called Clarity, And programmers were able to find these data pretty easily. But the problem is EPIC only started in 2005 at our institution, but the ACT study started in 1994. So we had 11 years where we didn't have our EPIC data. And we really wanted to figure out about no-shows in those early years. So our programmers were able to identify that we used to use an older system for scheduling visits for our patients, something called Last Word, and they were able to identify what years it was in use. And then they started digging around trying to find the data. And I would describe this process, it sort of sounded like they were looking for something in a crowded attic full of boxes, everything really dusty and nothing has labels. But eventually, our programmer was successful and felt he was able to find good information. So it was very exciting to really pioneer the development of that data resource at Kaiser Permanente, Washington. I'd like to show you some of our results. So I'm showing you some demographics and the comorbid conditions. In our sample, we have 436 people who had diagnosed dementia, and we compared them to 1,308 who had no dementia in that study. And not surprisingly, that the patients with undiagnosed dementia were a bit older. They were both groups were about 60% female and 90% white, and that's really representative of the racial and ethnic demographics in Seattle for these older patients. Our younger patients have considerably more ethnic and racial diversity. So findings was that the patients with undiagnosed dementia were more likely to have congestive heart failure to those without dementia, and also a history of cerebrovascular disease, stroke, or TIA, and these were both significant after we adjusted for age. And they also had, we also had looked at this concept of difficulty managing comorbid conditions. So for this part of the analysis, we limited to people who had hypertension, which the numbers are smaller. So now you see the people with undiagnosed dementia, it was 252 instead of original in the 400s. And I would say looking at what we found, basically there was no association. These kind of attempts to find labile, blood pressure, or overly tight or poor control, we aren't able to see any difference when diagnosed dementia cases. For diabetes, we had much smaller numbers. We only had 88 people with diabetes in our undiagnosed dementia group, so these that makes it challenging. But given that, we didn't really see much difference in these measures that we thought would measure poor control of diabetes. So for instance, their highest A1C was a little higher than the no dementia group. They weren't that different. Their lowest A1C, the best control they had, was a little higher, but 7.1 and 6.8 would both be considered to be pretty good glycemic control. So even if p-value is significant, it doesn't feel clinically very meaningful. The measure we tried to use for lability didn't really show any difference, and the missing-ness of A1C, both groups had very, very excellent completeness of their A1C data, so really nothing going on there. So that measure is not really looking like it would be useful for a risk model. And we found a lot more interesting things when we looked at people's healthcare utilization in the past 2 years. For instance, when we looked at ambulatory visits, in that case we didn't see much difference. We had difficulty actually separating out the preventive visits from the general ambulatory or primary care visits, and that's something we'd like to keep trying to achieve. For the ambulatory visits, the people with diagnosed dementia had a bit more visits, but it didn't turn out, it wasn't statistically significant in this case. But you did see a really dramatic difference with more ER visits, hospitalizations, more shows for clinic visits, and we got interested in the idea that maybe they would have more injuries or accidents or falls, and there were significantly more visits with a code suggesting an accident or injury compared to the people who had no dementia. It might be interesting, people might wonder, well, what about the people who found demented and their healthcare team actually already knew, the people with diagnosed dementia? So I thought I would show you their results for a series of tables also. And I would say what really piqued our interest here was that it almost felt like the diagnosed dementia group was the most severe, the no dementia group looked the healthiest, and undiagnosed dementia were kind of a middle category on all of these. So if you align for ED visits, the people with diagnosed dementia, 53% of them had at least one ED visit. The diagnosed dementia was 48%, and the no dementia was 25%. For hospitalizations, 46% of those with diagnosed dementia had at least one hospitalization, whereas for the undiagnosed dementia, it was 31%, and for the low dementia group, it was 21%. Kind of interesting to see that undiagnosed dementia group falling kind of in the middle between the other two groups. Show you our results for what we described, the group we described as the other presenting symptoms of dementia. These were things like weight change, depression, sleep problems. So in the undiagnosed dementia group compared to the no dementia group, undiagnosed dementia group had experienced a greater amount of weight change. And again, it was that lability measure. You find the maximum weight, the minimum weight, and you look at the difference. So probably from a clinical standpoint, I'd say I think they probably have lost a lot of weight is what that's likely reflecting. In terms of, we were interested in missingness, how many were missing a weight value in the last 2 years. There was more missingness for the undiagnosed dementia group. The diagnosed dementia group also was more likely to have depression, more likely to use antidepressants, which goes along with that, as not shown on this slide, and they were equally likely to using sleeping pills or sedative hypnotics. So that hypothesis didn't prove out, but we did see the difference for weight change and for depression. Again, you might be interested to see what the diagnosed dementia cases look like, the ones where the healthcare provider had recognized it. And again, and so we do see that interesting kind of intermediate pattern where the diagnosed dementia group had even more weight change than the undiagnosed group. For missingness of weight, there wasn't really a pattern, but for depression, they had even more depression. So they had 38% with depression. The undiagnosed dementia group is kind of in the middle, and then the no dementia group has the least depression at 14%. So the patterns, while we're not going to use these patterns as part of our modeling, it did give us sort of a reassurance that maybe we really are on the right track and these variables have some usefulness here, and it helped us feel more comfortable that there's really a clinical justification for thinking these variables as possible predictor variables in a future model. So just kind of concluding, wrapping up based on the results I've showed so far, we felt that with this pilot funding, we would take really critical steps to lay the foundation for future work. We were very comfortable that we were able to identify a cohort who we felt comfortable had undiagnosed dementia. We were able to do some chart reviews to validate that, yes, their healthcare team really had not recognized that they had memory issues or dementia. And then we were able to create a comparison group and make comparisons between the undiagnosed dementia and people who didn't have dementia. We also explored these novel measures and felt that we were able to achieve our goal. We did extract or create some of these novel measures. So we created measures that we thought would reflect difficulty managing chronic conditions, such as lability measures for blood pressure and A1C. Unfortunately, they didn't seem very predictive. And then we were able to extract and create variables for no-shows for clinic visits, which was a big step at our location because nobody else at Permanente, Washington was working with data like that. I've only shown you a small fraction of the analyses we did. We looked at a much larger number of kind of comorbid illnesses and health conditions. We did find a large number of individual variables that in varied analyses appear to be associated with undiagnosed dementia, even after adjustment for age. Some examples are illnesses such as heart failure, stroke, diabetes, and depression. These are things that have already been described usually as risk factors for dementia. We also found evidence of those chaotic patterns of care we suspected might happen, with ER visits, hospitalizations, and visits for accidents or injuries seeming to be associated again in univariate analyses with this undiagnosed dementia characteristic. And then also no-shows for clinic visits, which on my personal experience I had hypothesized might be associated, did look like they'd be a useful predictor and maybe fruitful for future modeling. However, the original funding wasn't enough to go forward and do the whole predictive model, and so it still remains to be seen whether we put all of these individual variables into a predictive model, are we able to develop a model that has strong ability to predict undiagnosed dementia. Back to our patient story, the story of Mr. J. He does, to some degree, fit this profile. He had labs that were ordered that he didn't follow through on. He no-showed for visits with me. My team had been prompted that this is a patient you should be worried about. He has red flags. We certainly could have reached out much more proactively and aggressively to remind him and his family of scheduled visits and to get them in for care. And I think potentially we could have made an earlier diagnosis of his dementia and provided a clearer answer about why he was doing so poorly at home. And what I really wonder, and we'll never know, is there a way we could have identified his cancer sooner before it ended in such a dramatic and tragic way? He had realized 2 or 3 or 4 years earlier he had missed that PSA check, and I never know the answer to that. But those kinds of stories really make me passionate about trying to pursue this line of work. So group's next steps. We're actively seeking funding that would let us develop this full predictive model, and then we really want to validate it prospectively. So to spell that out, we want to develop the model, apply it to current data in our EMR, identify real patients who are in care right now who screen positive with our model. We'd like to bring them in and do a research study type of evaluation using the ACT procedures and figure out what is the positive predictive value of various cut points of our model. So that's really our dream as the next step. We also see at the same time that it's going to be critical to seek input from our stakeholders about if we develop a great risk model, how would you want us to implement it in real-world clinical practice? We feel we need to hear from patients, family and caregivers, from clinicians and the leaders of our healthcare systems, because if it's implemented wrong, it could be burdensome and stressful, and if it's implemented right, it could hopefully reduce burden and get people better care. And the devil really will be in the details of how you implement it. And questions would be, what kind of resources or support is each group going to need before this would be feasible? So we have been writing grants that try to incorporate both of those aspects that we think are critical to developing a model and a plan for rolling it out. And our healthcare system, Kaiser Permanente Washington, is extremely interested and excited in this. So in R01, it was discussed and scored, but the score wasn't in a fundable range. And we got a number of criticisms. People expressed concern that a model like this could have unintended consequences or harm patients. And also they said that we lacked a cultural lens. And so the criticisms really highlighted our existing feeling that it's very important we have something to offer patients and their families if you make a dementia diagnosis in them. Like information and support, help with planning for the future, and access to local resources. I don't know, Catherine and Leah, if you're interested in doing any questions or discussions now, or if you'd like to hold them, but I'm certainly interested to hear any audience questions, and then I'm also interested in any advice or opinions about how you think we could move the work forward or what advice you have for us. And if we do move to that, then I just want to, again, acknowledge and thank the rest of the team and potentially open the floor to Catherine and Leah about whether this is a good time for discussion or whether we should wait till the end.
Hi, so this is Heather, and I'm happy to take questions if anybody would like to type in their questions. For anyone who joined us late, unless you're logged in as a panelist, your line is on mute. So if you do have questions, just please use the Q&A function. And I'm having of those. I've seen some comments saying very interesting work. Question. Do you have a history of reported quality measures related to control of blood pressure and diabetes in your clinics? Do you think that may have influenced the lack of difference between the dementia and no dementia groups for these data variables?
Great question. So yes, at Kaiser Permanente Washington, we have a very big emphasis on quality metrics, and we have a very strong active program using team-based care to get patients in and address care deficits. And, we're constantly having medical assistants pore over the data and send outreach calls and outreach emails. And so, on the one hand, I feel like we do a ton of work around this. On the other, I think we all know those patients who they don't listen to their voicemail, they don't open their email, they don't even read their letters. So you could imagine that dementia patients could be oblivious to a lot of this reminder work we do. But I think you're right that our aggressive approach to hitting quality metrics could obscure some of the differences. Hospitalized at twice the rate, right?
Yes, interesting. Another question that says, do you think that there are potentials here for an intervention? And this person is interested in the concept of chaotic care.
Yeah, no, we thought a lot about what would you do, what would intervention be. What's really interesting was finding out that as we were pursuing this line of work, leading our healthcare system, we're getting to the same place from a different angle. So they're saying, well, we have these patients who are super high utilizers with super chaotic care. We've got to get in there and figure out how to take care of them better. And what was amazing to some of them who are not geriatrically inclined, they came back realizing that 50% of the people they were identifying as really heavy utilizers had dementia that nobody had recognized. So they're experimenting with a model of care in one of our clinics where they're doing much more aggressive kind of finding in primary care, and they've created a little mini geriatric team to evaluate these patients and get them more settled. But certainly I think our vision is that you would use this to use the model. One is you get a list of patients for each PCP. You have these 5 patients that we think you should be worried about. P team who has a relationship reaches out and says, let's have you come on in and let's see how you're doing. And maybe doesn't even tell them we're worried you have dementia and assesses things out and does some cognitive screening and figures out more what's going on. These people probably need help whether they're demented or not. Another model would be to just when someone shows up in clinic, score or whatever red flag pops up opportunistically and says, you've got Mr. H in for a laceration, you should be asking about his memory while he's here. So ways you could do this, and we want our patients and frontline primary care doctors to tell us what will be least burdensome and most helpful to them.
They have 2 more questions that maybe we can now, and then just in the interest of time, go ahead and let Dr. Barnes present, and then we'll have more time for questions at the end. So the first of the 2 questions, one person asks, did you tease out whether the results were impacted by whether the patient was living with another person?
So wonderful. I don't think the EMR data tell us who they're living with. If we use natural language processing, I write at the top of all my notes, was the patient like accompanied by someone today, accompanied by husband or wife or child? So we could NLP to try to figure out who's their person, who's their support person, but we'd have that data in an automated form, but it's a fabulous idea.
You actually, that's a perfect segue into the second question, which is, did you analyze or have plans to analyze text of progress notes and natural language processing for additional clues or novel predictors for the presence of dementia?
I would with more funding. I've done quite a bit of NLP, and we have that kind of expertise here. It's a wonderful thing to do. One of my colleagues here, Rob Penfold, has done some work along those lines. He's actually been looking, they look for words like dementia in the progress note, and my feeling would be if the doctor's writing the word dementia in the progress note, the doctor is already thinking about dementia and doesn't need me to nag them with annoying pop-up reminders saying your patient might be demented. But I would love to hear if anyone has the energy to type up what you think some of those keywords or ideas would be. That's where I've been a little stymied, is once the doctor starts writing about memory problems and cognition and dementia, I think the doctor's got already that idea in their mind. But I want to find the ones where the doctor's not thinking about it yet.
Great. So I'll tell people to continue. Feel free to continue to type in your questions and send them along, and we'll get through as many of them as we have time for. I know that the presenters appreciate the discussion. But I think at this point, Dr. Barnes, we'll go ahead and let you move on to your presentation.
Great. Thank you. Let's see, so I'm looking, I'm share the screen.
Is there anything popping up on your screen?
No, it just says if you're having technical issues, type in something. Okay. Oh wait, up at the top it says share.
Oops, sorry.
But that's highlighted. Sorry. No, the presenter.
In the share screen or share file. Start.
On quick start.
Yep.
There we go. Thank you.
Yeah.
goodness. So I'm going to, there we go. On my screen if I do that?
Share my screen. If you click there and just go down to the first where it says share my screen.
I'm sorry. So can anyone see this now?
Anything?
Okay.
It's under the top
There,
under
oh,
share.
there we go. Yeah, it's under more options. Okay.
Yeah.
How's that? Excellent. Okay, thanks. I really thank you guys for inviting both of us to talk today. And so I'll be shifting gears a little bit to talk about the next step. So we've gone through this process of identifying someone who is, has undiagnosed dementia, what do you do once they've been diagnosed? And what I'll be talking about is some strategies to slow decline. So I think a lot of people in the field who feel like there's not much that can be done. So my goal today will be to try to convince you that there are things that can be done, and that's why it's worth detecting people early. I do have a disclosure. So I recently founded a company called Together Senior Health, which we are trying to commercialize. One of the programs I'll be talking about at the end called the PLIÉ program. I will say we do not actually have any money yet, but our hope is really to try to spread the program to many people as possible, and we're hoping to try to do that through this company. Here's an overview of what I'll be talking about. I'm going to start by reviewing some of the evidence on the drugs that are available for dementia, and then I'll talk about some non-drug treatments, including physical activity, social and cognitive engagement, music, caregiver education, and multi-component interventions. And then I'll end by talking about the program that we've been developing and testing. I wanted to start out by showing this evidence pyramid, which I apologize, I know it's a little bit blurry, but the idea is basically that as you move up the pyramid, you get more convincing and stronger evidence. So at the bottom of the pyramid are editorials and opinion articles, and you kind of move up to case theories and case reports, cross-sectional studies, control studies, cohort studies, and RTs. The top of the pyramid is systematic reviews and meta-analyses because those combine from numerous studies to try to give you the highest grade of evidence. So most of what I'm presenting today is coming from systematic reviews and meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials, the highest level of evidence. So first I'll talk about drugs that are available for dementia. So there are two classes of drugs that are approved by the FDA in the US to treat dementia, both associated with small improvements, mainly in cognitive function. So the first class is cholinesterase inhibitors, and randomized meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials have found that these are associated with improvements in cognitive function and physical function. And numbers that are shown on the right there are standardized effect sizes. Well, the next slides, I'll try to put those into perspective a little bit, but I just wanted to put them here. There's no hard and fast rule for what is a clinically meaningful effect size, but people often use these the lines that are shown here of a 0.2 is a small effect size, 0.5 is medium, and 0.8 is large. So what this is showing is that these are in the small range, basically. Memantine is the other drug that's been approved, which is more moderate to severe dementia. And meta-analyses have found that memantine is associated with improvements in cognitive function, with a size of 0.33, dementia-related behaviors of 0.22, and physical function of 0.11. And physical function, I should have said for this, is basically improvement in ADLs, in basic activities of daily living. So I wanted to try to visualize a little bit of what effect sizes show, what they mean. And so this is showing a small effect size And so if you think about these two curves, you could think about it being an intervention for something like blood pressure or a dietary intervention or something like that, where the red line is showing what's happening in the control group. So let's just say it's blood pressure. And blood pressure is going down slightly more in the intervention group, shown in black, than it is in the control group, shown in red. The average effect a little bit better in the treatment group. But see, there's a lot of overlap. So this whole area is overlap between the two groups, and there's a very small separation between the two groups. So that's basically what a small effect size looks like. Is some people are benefiting from this intervention. On average, there's a small difference between the two groups, but there's a lot of overlap. The slide shows what a medium effect size looks like, and what it's showing is that there's a little more separation between the two groups now. So the average effect size is a little bit better in the treatment group than it is in the control group, but still a lot of heterogeneity and overlap, even with medium effect size. This is a large effect size, so this is a standard difference of 0.8. And you can see even more difference between the two groups in terms of the average effect, but still some overlap between effects. So it's just important to recognize that even with a large effect size, there's still going to be some people who benefit more versus less with a given intervention. So when we mention medications, it's also important to note that although there are improvements on cognitive function and physical function and a little bit on behaviors, there's minimal impact on quality of life for people with dementia or caregivers. In addition, these medications are often discontinued due to the side effects. There's often GI side effects, and people have difficulty tolerating them. And in addition, they fundamentally don't change the disease course. So even if someone is responding really well to one of these medications, if you take them off, they go back to where they would have been if they've never been on the medication. So we don't have a disease-altering medication yet. There are some new drugs that are being tested right now, but they're mainly for prevention. A lot of the thinking in the field is that by the time someone has frank dementia, it may be kind of too late in the disease process for the medications to have very much effect. And so right now what people are doing is targeting people who have cognitive impairment or who even are asymptomatic and have changes in the brain for some of the new medications that are being tested. So I'd shift gears and talk a little bit about some of the evidence for non-drug treatments now. The first thing I'd like to talk about is physical activity. This has been a big focus of a lot of my research. And, I think it's really important to note that when I talked about the evidence period, I should have said at the very top, I think, is these Cochrane reviews, which are incredibly systematic and very rigorous. And so there actually have been Cochrane reviews, recent Cochrane reviews for a lot of these interventions. So this one found 16 randomized controlled trials of physical activity interventions in people with dementia. A fair amount of evidence. The total N in those trials was 937. Most of those interventions were looking at kind of traditional exercise interventions. So they were walking, balance, and strengthening interventions. Mostly they were done in institutional settings. That tends to be a slightly easier place to test some of these interventions. So most of the interventions have been done there. And, this Cochrane review found that looking across these randomized controlled trials, there's consistent evidence for improved physical function and some hints of evidence for improved cognitive function. So I'll show you that on this slide here. So what this is showing is, I'm going to kind of show this table going over the course of the talk, but this is the two lines for the cholinesterase inhibitors and memantine, the two drugs that are available, show effect sizes for different outcomes, so physical function, cognitive function, quality of life, mood and behaviors, and caregiver outcomes. And the effect sizes that I showed you before for physical function and cognitive function, and then the mood and behaviors. what I'm doing here is adding the evidence that we now have for exercise. So this is effect size for exercise from an analysis. So it's a 0.68 standard deviation improvement in physical function, which is ADLs. So what this shows is that it's more than twice as good as these medications are. And cognitive function, although this was not quite, it's very close to statistical, I shouldn't say, but it is close to statistically significant, not significant, but close. But the magnitude is comparable to these. I need a few more trials to kind of tell us if exercise has an effect on cognitive function. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is cognitive activity. Again, there have been two relatively recent Cochrane reviews looking at different types of cognitive activity interventions in people with dementia. So the first type of training is kind of direct cognitive training. So these are structured activities to improve a targeted ability. So for example, doing a retraining intervention to try to improve memory. So really trying to target the ability that's affected by the dementia. So the review identified 11 trials that included 476 people, and looking across those trials, they found no evidence of an effect for that kind of intervention on cognition, on mood, or on activities of daily living. I think it's important to point out, both when we have evidence that something works, but also when there's evidence that something doesn't seem to work very well. So it seems like that targeted training of the affected ability is not very effective in somebody who has dementia. In contrast, when the reviews looked at cognitive and social stimulation interventions, there seemed to be more of a beneficial effect. So these are group activities that are designed to promote cognitive and social function. So for example, at adult programs, they often in a circle and have coffee and talk about current events or what's going on in the paper, or as shown in the picture here, play board games together. Those kinds of social interactions that include a cognitive component have tested in 15 randomized controlled trials with 718 people, and that kind of intervention in people with dementia have a significant impact on both cognitive function and quality of life. So that now to the table. So showing here, this is what the effect sizes are. So these are in the small to moderate range, showing improvements in both cognitive function and quality of life. No effect on activities of daily living, mood or caregiver outcomes. So, but definitely a significant effect there on cognitive function and quality of life. Next kind of intervention I'd like to talk about is music. This is from a systematic review that included 20 studies. These were not all randomized controlled trials, so it was a mixture of different kinds of studies. A total of 651 people were included in the different interventions. In this systematic review, there was evidence that music significantly reduced both anxiety and behavioral symptoms in people who have dementia. For anyone who hasn't seen it, I just want to put in a little plug for this documentary that was made a few years ago called Alive Inside, and I put a link there to a trailer for it. It's a very compelling documentary about the effects of music in people who have even very advanced dementia, and how listening to music from their use can bring back these really positive emotions. Music onto the grid here. Music did not in that systematic review have an effect really on function, cognitive function, or quality of life, but it really seemed to have the biggest effect in this area of mood and behavior. Next intervention that's been studied a lot is caregiver education. And the evidence here is coming from this really fantastic paper by Oliver that was published in 2010. This is a really comprehensive comprehensive system review that looks at all kinds of different non-pharmacologic interventions for people with dementia. For caregiver education, they identified 33 different randomized controlled trials and found evidence that caregiver education interventions significantly improved dementia-related behaviors in the affected individual, as well as caregiver mood for community-based interventions and caregiver well-being for institutional interventions. So education to the grid here, you can see that's where the improvements are. So I hope what I'm kind of showing is this pattern where different kinds of these non-pharm interventions improve different domains of well-being for affected individuals and caregivers. And what I'd like to talk about now is multi-component interventions. Kind of seems intuitive that if each one of these individually has a kind of domain-specific effect, that if you had a multi-component intervention, you might see a more broad-based effect. And that is indeed what the evidence suggests. So the Oliveron systematic review identified 19 randomized controlled trials that were done of multi-component interventions. They found actually the highest level of evidence that these kinds of interventions can delay institutionalization when they're done in the community. I think is so it's very high evidence for that particular outcome. In addition to that, they found evidence that this kind of intervention can improve physical function, cognitive function, behaviors, mood, and quality of life in the affected individual, as well as some of the caregiver outcomes. And add those effects to this grid, I suppose as kind of these combined interventions give a bang for the buck of improving all of these domains at once. And also just comparing the magnitude to what's available with drugs, these effect sizes are, either the same, about the same magnitude or larger than what you see with dementia medications. And, they range in magnitude from small to medium for physical function and cognitive function to medium to large for quality of life, mood and behaviors, and caregiver outcomes. That shifts gears and talk a little bit about the PLIÉ program that we've been developing and testing to some extent based on this evidence. The goal of the PLIÉ program, PLIÉ stands for Preventing Loss of Independence Through Exercise, is to design a group movement program that kind of mapped in, it was kind of a multi-domain group movement program. Basically, our goal was to try to have something that included a physical functional component along with a cognitive component, a social component, also music, and involving caregivers all into one nice little neat package. And I think one thing that kind of ties into what I talked about with the cognitive training programs that are not effective is that we're focusing on abilities that are maintained rather than lost. So we're really trying to target the parts of the brain that are still functional in people who have cognitive impairment and dementia. We're studying two different versions of the program. The other PLIÉ program includes 10 affected individuals together. They do the program for 1 hour, 2 to 3 days a week for 18 weeks. And the cohort goes through the program together. So, and that really is important, I think, because it helps to build both a social cohesion with the group. So it's not like people are dropping in and out, but they get to know each other over the course of the program. They're also able to build a functional progression by starting where people are at the beginning and then working with each, with the whole group together to increase their functional capacity. That's the main PLIÉ program. And then we're also testing a version called paired PLIÉ, where it's 5 pairs of affected individuals with their care partners doing the program together. And that's for 1 hour, 2 days a week for 12 weeks. So the key elements of PLIÉ, one of the key elements is targeting muscle memory or procedural memory. And we do this through repetition of movement sequences for basic daily movement. So for example, we focused a lot on the sit to stand transition. So a lot of people to remember to plant their feet flat on the ground and really working with the functional pieces of that sit to stand transition, and then also balancing while standing. So we increase the functional difficulty, and also the pace is very slow, and we use very broken down into steps. So it takes all the cognitive demands away, basically. So it's something that people who have memory loss and dementia can still do. And the fascinating thing about this is that the body remembers even when the mind forgets. So people come into the class, they don't remember having ever been there before, and yet we start doing the movements, their bodies just know what comes next. It's really fascinating to watch. Element of the program is a mindfulness component. And what I mean by mindfulness is bringing people into the present moment. So being in the moment mindful body awareness, getting them to focus on breathing, awareness of their sensations. Are their hands feeling hot or cold? Can they feel their butt on the chair when they're sitting there? Those kinds of things. And to still the mind. So that's another component of mindfulness. And what we find there is that people with memory loss and dementia are really fantastic at being in the moment. They're always living in the moment. And so we try to take advantage of that and have that be a reassuring place to be, to know that if they're feeling anxious about something that they're having trouble remembering, to just come back to the present moment and remember that they're here now, breathing, that can be relaxing and reassuring. The element of the program is bringing in music and social engagement. So all of the movements are done sitting in a circle, and we encourage people to connect with each other through shared movement. So for example, reaching across the circle and holding hands. And then we don't have music playing all the time as background, but we bring in related musical selections to enhance positive emotions and the social connection. So we actually ask people what their favorite songs are, and if they're, so every group has different songs that they like. We try to tailor the music to them. And here, a lot of what we're trying to do is target this nonverbal and emotional thing. So people with memory loss often rely more on nonverbal and emotional cues, and so we're trying to use that to create a positive environment. Last thing is that we involve the caregivers. So we ask the caregivers about each person's background and what their motivators and their goals are. We do a monthly home visit, and we have an illustrated booklet and a video for home practice. And that's based on evidence that from physical therapy and occupational therapy that people's motivation can be increased if you tailor programs to their personal goals and interests. They become much more interested in, in programs. So we have done a pilot study we've actually now tested it. We're in the middle of testing it in 90 different people, but this pilot study was from the first 12 people that we tested. And this is a between-group comparison. So we did have a control group, and this is the difference between the two groups. Everyone was at an adult day program already, so they were already getting a lot of stimulation, and this is showing what our program added above and beyond what they were already getting. And also, all of these measures are measures that are used in drug trials. We wanted to be able to use the same metrics for our program so we could compare head-to-head with medications. So the cognitive function measure here is actually the ADAS-COG, the Alzheimer's Disease Assessment Scale, which is used by the FDA for approval of dementia medications. So effect size here was 0.76, which is getting close to a medium to large effect size. Our measure here on quality of life is the Alzheimer's Disease Quality Scale. So we are, getting, as I said, into the moderate to large effect sizes. These are more in the small to moderate range, but consistent with what I showed you previously for the multi-domain interventions, we're seeing improvements across all of these different domains. Some qualitative analyses. So in affected individuals, we're observing physical changes, including increased awareness of physical sensations, increased functional skill, so in particular that sit-to-stand transition, which we're really treating. And you see this movement memory where their bodies just start. They know what's next in a sequence of movements. We're observing emotional changes, so people saying there's their acceptance of resting, people saying that they feel peaceful, they feel calm. Sometimes the movements bring back emotional memories, which is really interesting. So there's an airplane movement that brought a whole series of memories for a woman in the program who had been a flight attendant. And there's a growing appreciation of the program itself. There's actually a lot of skepticism in the beginning, which is interesting because we call exercise, but it's not what people traditionally think of as exercise. So people are often questioning, why are we doing this movement? And over time, we find that there's greater appreciation for what we're doing. And then we also observe social changes, and in particular, decline in anxiety. So one woman occasionally, and she would always tuck her purse strap under her chair, like she was worried that someone was going to steal her purse. And over time, she felt comfortable just kind of leaving her purse in the corner. And then greater social connection. So one of my stories is a woman who was very skeptical in the beginning, and then at one in the class, she and the woman next to her spontaneously broke into a song in Italian from their childhood. And they sit together, and every time she walked into the class after that, she would spread arms wide open and say, "My friend." So it really facilitated bonding between them, and they'd already been attending the day program together, so they were already together during the day, but the thing about the circle created a space for them to make this great connection with each other. For the paired PLIÉ program, these are some of the qualitative results we're seeing from the caregivers. They're also observing physical benefits. So this is one quote, I think mom is benefiting physically, straighter posture sometimes, easier to go from sit to stand and climb stairs. Caregiver quote about the cognitive benefits that she was observing with her husband. He seemed more alert, spoke more, followed instructions, enjoyed more when he was engaged. For some of the social emotional benefits, this is a caregiver who said, "I'm slimmer and calmer, no stress, even when she asked one question several times over." So I think this speaks to one of the things that caregivers often deal with, is just being asked the same question over and over again. And for caregivers, the wellness part of it, I think, of bringing them into their bodies and getting them to breathe more can be helpful for dealing with some of the caregiver burden. So let me see if I can show this brief video. I think that's it. Oops, no, that's not what I wanted to do. Enter full screen.
My name is Sascha. We have Alzheimer's. Really, my mother had Alzheimer's. And we didn't realize that till she was almost gone. I realized where I was headed.
Children alone, currently 271,000 are in Joe who have Alzheimer's disease and dementia. In 2033, that number is expected to rise to 335,000, a 4% increase as the veterans grow older. Mike and I have developed and tested a unique new group movement program for people with dementia called Personal Loss of Independence Through Exercise, or PLIÉ. PLIÉ is recent discoveries in neuroscience and integrative medicine, target abilities that still work well in people with dementia. This is the ability to learn movement sequences through procedural or muscle memory, to be aware of physical sensations, and the need to connect in meaningful ways with others. Groups with dementia participate together for 1 hour, 2 days a week for 12 to 18 weeks.
And she's like, tomorrow we're going out in December, and get
going to the PLIÉ program, so he was able to walk, which is what it is, like a walker. And he got out of the car the first time, and I said, remember what you do in the PLIÉ program? You move your butt and you scoot, and he could get out of the car.
It's been a good kind of exercise I wouldn't have done before. I understand it. I've done that exercise, and I think does it help my part? It helps the way.
In 90 people and observing meaningful improvements in civil function, cognitive function, quality of life, and caregiver well-being. We have received the VA Innovators Award, which is helping us to spread PLIÉ by identifying clinical champions to increase referrals, partner with the CLC, Adult Day Center contractors, and the YMCA to provide space, and PLIÉ as a new clinical service through our Strength and Wellness program. People with dementia experience a progressive decline in physical and cognitive function, which makes them more likely to fall, be hospitalized, and require institutional care. Their healthcare costs are 3 times higher than veterans without dementia.
We're working with a very vulnerable population of people who people think there's not much to be able to be done with. And we ourselves are amazed at the changes that are possible with people with dementia. When the disease progresses, to remain some of that independence that is really because, when, you lose all your independence, what is left?
So thank you for let's share that. I should have said I received the VA Innovators Award for a grant to spread the PLIÉ program. So we were able to create a pitch as part of that program. So that's what you just saw. Summary and conclusions: why early detection of dementia matters. As Dr. Dublin said at the beginning, more than 5 million Americans have dementia right now, and half of them are undiagnosed. The EMR contains data elements that may help detect patients who have undiagnosed dementia. And as she highlighted, some of these include ER visits and hospitalizations, accidents and injuries, missed clinic visits, and related symptoms and risk factors such as weight loss, depression, TBI, or traumatic brain injury and stroke. Dementia drugs may benefit some patients, and there's a lot of evidence now that non-drug treatments have many potential benefits and few risks. In addition, multi-component programs seem to be the best, and PLIÉ is one example of a multi-component program that may be beneficial. There's also many other potential benefits to early detection, and this includes a lot of the things that Dr. Dublin talked about in the beginning: management of comorbidities, hopefully fewer ER visits and hospitalizations, fewer accidents, and also opening up the opportunity for advanced care planning and reduced stress in family members and affected individuals. So funding that I've received for this work and others, I'm very grateful for all the funding that's been provided for my work, and I'd like to thank co-investigators, research team for the PLIÉ program in particular.
Sascha, I really want to thank both of you for 2 outstanding presentations and for the really wonderful work that you've both done on an important topic. And to that point, I'll just say that we've had several comments just to say that people really felt that your work was very amazing and were impressed with these presentations. Several of the questions have been answered. Sascha, thanks for being active on the Q&A function and directly answering several of the questions. I did want to note that asked if there would be an opportunity to have the slides, and Catherine has answered that the recording and a PDF of the slides will be made available after this webinar. So if other people were thinking the same thing, they can email Catherine and request those materials, and there's her email being displayed right now. In addition, I noticed, Deb, you showed your email, and another question that someone asked is, may we reach out to you if people are working on similar topics, and I'm assuming since you showed your email that the answer to that is so. Thank you for providing.
Absolutely, please.
All right. I'm gonna.
I'd be happy. I apologize. I didn't put my email on my slide, but I'd be happy to have it be shared, or it's pretty easy. It's dublin.s at, we're still ghc.org in our email for another few months, but we will eventually be KP. But I should be easy to find.
Okay, great. Thank for that. And then the only other question that I saw that I think, Sascha, you didn't have a chance to respond to in text was, how are you taking into account the help of caregivers for patients with potentially undiagnosed dementia? This person says caregivers may play a role in helping manage comorbid conditions, filling meds, and keeping clinic appointments.
No, I agree. I think that's really important, and the patients that I see struggling the most are those who live alone, particularly if they have no children nearby. I think this ties in with the earlier question we got asked, which is, can you tell if people have a spouse? And I think that's a weakness of the EMR. That would be that kind of information. Do they have a caregiver or someone involved in their life? You could tell that by reading the text notes, and you might be able to tell with NLP, but you can't tell that from ICD-9 codes and lab results. But I agree that the predictive model would probably be much more effective if we could separate out the people who have a partner or child engaged with their care. And the ones who don't, I think we'll see a lot bigger problems with no-shows, ER visits, hospitalizations.
Great, thank you. I also see another question that has come in and says, for text mining of progress notes, can you compare completeness of history versus incomplete history as an early predictor? Not sure how you would set this up, but people with early dementia would not be as specific with their answers.
I think it's a wonderful clinical observation. I completely agree. My not to be too snide comment would be, I can't tell the difference between the doctor. In my setting, we're seeing 16 patients a day and 4 phone visits, and we feel like we're busy. I think the doctor's notes get shorter every year. And so I think sometimes the doctors are documenting incompletely, and I can't tell if it's the patient not providing it or that people are just jotting down bullet points or templates.
Yeah, really good point. Another question was about, but this one is for Deb, and it's asking about ApoE status of the patients. If you know if there's any difference in response to PLIÉ based on ApoE status.
We have not looked at that, so we haven't drawn blood on any of our patients, and I'm unaware of any interventions that have stratified based on that. My understanding, though, of ApoE is that it's more of a risk factor, so it increases your risk of developing Alzheimer's or dementia, but it doesn't change your course once you're diagnosed by non-clinical understanding.
You may have said this, and I might have missed it. Did you specifically target Alzheimer's disease for your PLIÉ recruitment, or did you include all-cause dementia?
Question, I did not speak to that, but we were very inclusive, actually. So it was all-cause dementia, Alzheimer's, vascular dementia. We also had some people with Lewy body dementia in there. A very pragmatic approach, just taking whoever happened to be in the program. Everyone was more in the mild to moderate range. The one pilot group was more moderate to severe, and much harder to at least measure impact in that group. We kind of believed that people benefited, but it was just very hard to get questions completed. So to target some more mild to moderate patients now, participants.
To kind of comment, just to kind of comment on that, there was another question in the Q&A to me asking, were you able to distinguish Alzheimer's from other types? And I can just repeat my response to that in case it would be other people in the group. The ACT study does attempt in the consensus committee to assign diagnosed Alzheimer's disease using standard criteria, and about 70 to 75% of our patients with dementia are considered to have Alzheimer's. But we also do autopsies of their brains, and like many studies, if you look at patients in their 70s and 80s who develop dementia, even classified as Alzheimer's disease, what we see is almost entirely very mixed pathology with microvascular, macrovascular Alzheimer's changes and Lewy bodies in different parts of the brain. So it does seem like the brain it's a really strong phenotype of sort of pure Alzheimer's disease in these older community-based cohorts. I think the distinctions we make are somewhat artificial.
So a question for each of you about possible future plans for your work. So there's a question about whether there are any plans for trials for PLIÉ. And also there was a question about, Sascha, whether you have any interest in the future developing sort of like a survey tool that would complement information that you can get from the EMR.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I can take the PLIÉ question first. So we are actually hoping to sit in R01 in October. So if anyone is interested in partnering with us, please out.
Deb Pecori, do you think they would be ready for a large pragmatic study?
I actually submitted a Pecori grant on this a few years ago, and they didn't like it, sadly. We had a ton of community-based support, but I cracked the Pecori nut. I think it was because it has to be evident, the evidence has to be proven. I can talk more later.
Yeah, they seem to have one proven treatment and another proven, like they want things that are already widely used or accepted.
Yes, exactly. It wasn't a comparative effectiveness trial,
Yeah. In terms of my work, I assume the question is about a survey component, meaning asking patients questions. Is that what it means?
That was how I interpreted it as well, just to supplement because of the obvious limitations of the EMR. Although, I can also see that the clear benefit is the EMR may be what all hospital administrators have.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, the heart of our idea really is, what can we do that has no burden for physicians or patients? What can we do, and what can we do for people who aren't showing up, or who maybe showed up a year ago but have stopped showing up? So to me, the beauty of what we want to do is that an algorithm that runs in your EMR with no effort from anyone. I think Deb can speak more to what do we know about screening for dementia through questionnaires, and Deb's done work on that. When you do ask people questions, how well can you predict it? But we wanted to do it with no burden. And do you want to comment on surveys?
Yeah, we have developed a few prediction models, mainly to identify people who are at risk. So we do have one for the primary care, but those that are most predictive tend to be, like brief screens. They're asking people about whether they've noticed any memory loss, which place burden on the medical system. And so that's exactly why we kind of wanted to do this, was to have something automated running in the background. One thing we've talked about is using something from the annual Medicare wellness visit, because that does have a little bit more nuance in it. So we've talked, it's not available on everybody, but that could be another source of data that includes, detailed questions.
I think the challenge again, though, Deb, what it comes down to is if your patient's in your office sitting in front of you, you ask them the question, do you have cognitive problems? Are you having memory concerns? And they say yes. You really don't need us to prompt you. Like in theory, you just got told your patient has memory problems. You should decide if you're going to work it up. And EMR pumping out little reminders at you saying, check on this, might be annoying.
Point. You guys have reminders, right? I think what I like about the EMR work is, as you just said, is the fact that it would be running in the background and help. It would be more of a help than a hindrance. That's the goal, is to have something that would tag those patients to improve their care. To the feedback that we got on our reviews, there's a concern about unintended consequences. And that's part of our challenge, is convincing people that they want this. When we did our surveys, patients really want to know if they're going to, if they have a risk of having dementia. They actually want to know. And our challenge is to convince clinicians that detection is important and the things that you can do.
And I do appreciate you also putting out there for the group's kind of consideration and feedback about some of the questions. I don't know, we're in our sort of last minutes here, but your emails are now being displayed on the screen. So if anyone has additional thoughts, are there topics other than unintended consequences that you were hoping to get feedback on today?
With the comments about cultural lens, comments back from a study section, you're trying to guess whose comment was this and what did they mean. The person said it with no further explanation. I'm assuming the person is referring to the fact that the group health population's 90% white. But, do people feel that, I guess, this may measure my ignorance. I'm just wondering if in more culturally diverse communities, are they saying that it's only sort of white, highly educated people who want to know if they have dementia? 'Cause that doesn't make any sense to me. I would imagine that a loved older family member struggling with dementia would be of great stress for a variety of cultural bounds. But I would be very interested to hear what it is that I'm kind of missing about the cultural lens comment.
Yeah, it's an interesting comment, and I tend to agree with you that if anything, it's certainly something that merits future study and even elicit some of that information through mixed methods or other one from the participants themselves in a more diverse group.
That it's possible in bringing that up and could have being ignorance. I hope I didn't word it in a way that upset or offended anyone. I certainly am seeking to understand and not sure what I'm missing. So would welcome people's thoughts about what kind of cultural impact there might be in this area.
I think maybe that also even goes to potential unintended consequences. Unintended consequences may be different from culture to another, and it's always, I guess, helpful to think about. But I'm similarly not aware of those differences, but it may be my own ignorance. So I think we are right at our hour, and I want to thank both of you for not only two great presentations today, but really excellent and important work that I think this was very thought-provoking. So thanks to all who joined our webinar. And again, as always, we thank the Aging Initiative and the NIA for supporting this series.
Supporting our work.
All right, thank you. Thanks very much. Bye.